More than you can afford, pal. Volkswagen, with a stock ECU. Say smoke 'em, if you like boys.
Smoke.
Something arrived. Today, we will not be talking about this side of the car, or this side of the car. We'll finally be sorting out all of this muck and gubbins. I should really stop leaving all these spoilers on display. And following on from a spoiler from another video, the first thing we'll do today is center console related. Right now, that's fitting extremely nicely. I've got about 5mm more to trim off before that's a perfectly flush fit. Probably more off the back than the front, because it seems perfect here, and about 2 or 3mm higher at the back. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because bracketing this is going to need a little bit of precision. And this part here is going to raise up a little bit once I've fitted all the carpet and insulation under here. This means that it's right about time to fit the first little piece of my ginger carpet. I really hope this works. My body's gone.
My body's gone.
Now, as far as I'm aware, these preformed bits of carpet rely on having some kind of insulation underneath them. Otherwise, they just don't fit properly and end up a little bit baggy. So to combat that, now moving on, I think it's time to do something else. But first, you think you're right, but you're actually really incredibly wrong. In this part of the video, I tear apart your comments. Because my last video, it became apparent that idiots wanted to make themselves known. So I'm going to go through the best of the idiot comments and casually dissect them. So let's start with an easy one. Below me. I'll just cover some of the highlights. It's quite clear you don't know much about ECUs. Your talk of the MAP sensor, which would literally take 2 minutes to calibrate on any decent ECU, just shows how you do indeed know little. Most are linear. Only a complete idiot would check 2 points and assume the rest. Firstly, you're wrong. If you want to get technical, if you can't plot it with 2 points, then it ain't linear. And secondly, any thermal-based sensor is not going to be linear. Check out a thermal normalizing plot. And tell me you've never touched calculus without telling me you've never touched calculus. Because linear, the gradient stays the same. Non-linear, it doesn't stay the same. Non-linear, you'd plot many points if you're using an aftermarket ECU. Linear, you don't really need to. But true linear is kind of rare. He then goes on to tell me my water to air coolers are pieces of shit. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I asked him how he'd improve my water to air intercooler setup, because I'm open to both suggestions and constructive criticism. But he then just proceeds to tell me everything's shit, so you earn one of these. Craig, I have no idea what you said, but if it was a good thing, otherwise. Now this guy wrote a bloody thesis, and I wanted to like the comment. I really did. But it turns out you're an idiot as well. Luckily you numbered your paragraphs, so we can deconstruct you one by one. Starting with this comment. I've worked on and have an aftermarket ECU, and based on my knowledge, all of your concerns are technically invalid. Well, John, even virgins can buy condoms. So let's continue. Most sensors you have are out of spec anyway, and no two sensors are the same. With an aftermarket ECU, you can calibrate each one. No two sensors are the same. So you're telling me that if I expose a temperature sensor to one temperature, it's not going to give me the same resistance as every other in-spec temperature sensor? If it doesn't, it's out of spec and should be replaced. Now this guy is heavily leaning towards aftermarket ECUs. Now this factory ECU has built-in thresholds for every single sensor. That's how it knows that it'll be out of spec. And if I did it this way and calculated on actual values, I would never know if the sensor is out of spec or not. The only way around that is to use a brand new sensor that you assume is correct. Point number 2. You can use any type of sensor you want to out of any car. You can disable Lambda, disable everything except TPS and MAP. Add sensors like flex fuel in cars that don't have them. I assume that's what you meant. Change ignition type, ignition trigger pattern, and many other things. On a diesel? Now this guy seems to think that my goal is to just get this thing running in the barest form. If I remove all these sensors that are there for a reason, to help with the running environment of the engine, I'm going to end up with something that runs like a sack of shit. Which means it'll make rubbish power and use heaps of fuel. And almost every point he's made is relating to petrol engines, when this is clearly not a petrol engine. Number 3. Automatic transmissions are not an issue. I don't think a comment is needed on that bit. While you can get an aftermarket gearbox controller, why would I bother if I have a perfectly good factory one that an aftermarket one is never going to be better than? You can have sensor diagnostics and see logs which are more useful than seeing a check engine light and finding a misfire code leading to nowhere. I wonder what this is for. Or if a cable that's $1,500 cheaper than your aftermarket ECU isn't going to do it for you, maybe this sub-$20 VAGCOM cable would be perfectly capable of clearing and identifying codes. Anyway, the rest of what John has to say is basically garbage, based on his experience of probably tuning his own car once, with knowledge he found on Facebook and forums. And the rest of the idiot comments follow a similar suit of this. You heard me say one thing justifying why I did this for my build, and you understood it as, this is the only way anyone should ever do it. And those ones aren't really worth addressing, because if you misunderstand a relatively basic video, then you have bigger problems. I will finally touch on this guy though, because I think it's quite funny. He thinks that basic programming and ECUs are made by wizards. And he uses something extremely basic to code, like a calculator, which is literally an exercise that a first-year programming student would get to do as an assignment, and thinks it's something that boggles the mind, even after someone else interjected and tried to explain to him in extremely simple terms how coding works. He still didn't get it. Must be a pretty magical device you're watching this on right now. Anyway, back to this car.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Now this is going to get annoying. And this is because I'm not a seamstress. Now the main purpose of this is to take up the gap left by some of these fatter wiring loom pieces. This will give it a little bit of extra protection from feet, as well as making it a little bit more comfortable, even though this stuff doesn't do much for acoustics. Acoustics? I almost forgot. I never film myself rolling up the sound deadening, because it triggers the tryhards. Now you might ask yourselves, why didn't I do the whole interior in sound deadening? 2 reasons. Firstly, because the majority of the noise is generated by the engine behind the firewall, and the transmission in the transmission tunnel. That's why these are sound deadened. The other reason is, I ran out. At this stage, I'm just about ready to put that first bit of carpet in. And obviously, that's not going to go quite as to plan as you'd hope it would. And that's because it has no holes cut in it, as you can see. And this is a blessing and a curse. A curse because it gives me extra work to do, but a blessing because this obviously isn't a standard Nissan Patrol. So I have to make my own holes. Now, even though it may not seem it, this is starting to look like something. These are all the wires that go into the center console gubbins, like the selector for the transfer case and stuff like that. The key sensors have been positioned here, and that means that if the key is somewhere around here, then the keyless ignition should work just fine. And lastly, whatever this is, I'm not quite sure what it is, but it acts as a nice bracket, and I can leave it plugged in to make it look important. Anyway, I think you've seen enough of carpet being installed, so the rest of it will be done in a fancy way. Almost. Marvellous. It probably looks a bit baggy, but I'm going to cut out this middle bit to make it fit better the center console, and then I'll build it up from there. Center console. Now that is not fitting too badly at all. Obviously I've got to put the weird little glove boxy type thing in there, and then plug in all these nonsense bits. But this edge here is basically perfect. That's pretty much flush there. This one has to come down a little bit by 10 mil. That would involve trimming a few mil off this edge here to kind of bring it down that way a little bit. And then it's a case of adding a couple of brackets there, and a couple more somewhere around there, and that'll be the majority of the interior done. Now while we're looking at my disgustingly sweaty face, I'm just about ready to go for a test drive. There is something small that I have to figure out first. This slightly critical component. And in case it wasn't blindingly obvious, this doesn't just bolt on as you would hope. And this sort of thing brings you on nicely to what's going to be happening in the next episode. But don't go anywhere, because throttle pedals aside, I have an announcement. You might remember this piece of gym equipment from my disability project. You won't know about it because nobody saw that video. It's up there. The project was unfortunately unsuccessful, and I've decided to throw in the towel with it. Now this prototype piece of gym equipment was specifically made for someone suffering from lower body paralysis or someone who has difficulty walking or using the lower half of their body. Now thankfully, this is no use to me, so I'm going to give it away. If anyone knows someone who would benefit from this, then I'll be more than happy to deliver it within 2 hours of Sydney. I won't make a video about it because I'm not a disgraceful clout chaser, but I'll give it to someone who needs it. Emphasis on someone who needs it. If you just want a piece of gym equipment for free, you can go fuck yourselves. But if you genuinely have a use for this, let me know. This email. That's all, bye.